The wind howled across the jagged Norwegian coastline as gray waves slammed into the base of towering cliffs. Deep within the narrow fjord, a small fishing vessel crept through the mist, its lone occupant guiding it with the patience of someone who knew these waters as well as the lines on his hands. Eric Halvorsen, a 32-year-old historian with a stubborn streak, scanned the rock faces for the ancient carvings rumored to mark the burial site of King Harald the Last. The locals spoke in hushed tones of treasure buried beneath the fjords, guarded by the spirits of warriors who would let no man pass unworthy. Eric muttered to himself, "If the legends are true, this is where it begins." His eyes caught faint shapes carved into the stone, half hidden by moss and centuries of salt. The hair on his neck prickled, and for a moment the air seemed to thrum, as if the fjord itself was holding its breath. Somewhere beneath these waters lay a secret lost for nearly 1,000 years. Eric eased the boat toward a narrow shelf of rock where the carvings stood clearer, their lines sharper than he expected for something so old. "These marks, they're not just warnings," he whispered. The fjord's walls amplified his voice, carrying it back to him in ghostly echoes. He traced one symbol with his eyes. It was shaped like an arrow pointing inland. A shiver ran through him. This was no mere legend carved in stone. It was a map. He pulled a notebook from his satchel, quickly sketching the pattern before the tide shifted and the angle of light faded. The air here felt heavy, charged, as if each breath drew in the weight of centuries. Somewhere deep beyond the cliffs, the resting place of the last Viking king was calling, and Eric could feel it in his bones. A sudden splash broke the silence. Eric froze, his pencil hovering over the page. Something had slipped beneath the water's surface near the cliffs, too large for a fish, too swift for drifting debris. His gaze swept the fjord, but the mist had thickened, swallowing all but a few meters ahead. He steadied his breath. "Probably just the tide," he said aloud, though his voice lacked conviction. The old fisherman who sold him the boat had warned of strange currents and darker things moving through these waters. Eric tucked the notebook away and reached for the small harpoon mounted near the bow, not as a weapon of choice, but as insurance. The carvings were still there waiting, but now the fjord seemed to watch him back. The tide began to turn, pulling the boat gently away from the cliff wall. Eric tightened the rope anchoring him to the rock, unwilling to lose his vantage point. He studied the runes again, his mind piecing together fragments from old sagas and forgotten maps. If the arrow pointed inland, there must be a hidden pass, perhaps a cave system carved by glacial melt long before the Vikings came. The thought quickened his pulse. He adjusted his position, peering into the shadows beneath the overhang where the water turned dark as oil. Somewhere in that darkness the entrance might lie, masked by tide and time. "You've been waiting a long time," he murmured to the stones, "but I'm here now." The first chill of evening began to creep into the fjord, turning the mist to silver in the fading light. Eric stowed his notebook and unfastened the rope, letting the tide nudge the vessel away from the cliff. His mind buzzed with possibilities. The carvings, the arrow, the dark water below. Every instinct urged him to press deeper now, but night in the fjords could be merciless. He decided to return at first light, better prepared for whatever lay beneath. As he steered toward the small harbor at the fjord's mouth, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound, distant, rhythmic, almost like the beat of a drum. He turned back once more to the cliffs, but the mist had already swallowed them whole. The following morning, the fjord was a mirror of pale gray, the mist lighter but still clinging to the water like breath on glass. Eric pushed the boat out from the dock, the wood groaning softly under his weight. He had barely slept, his dreams plagued by the sound of that distant drum beat, each pulse drawing him deeper into darkness. Now, with the first light breaking behind the cliffs, he retraced his path toward the ruins. The water here was unusually calm, unnervingly so, as though the fjord were holding itself still to watch his return. His breath puffed in small clouds as he approached the spot from yesterday. The carvings were waiting, their sharp lines catching the morning light. He leaned over the side, peering into the depths beneath the overhang. A dark shape shifted far below, too deep to make out, but large enough to quicken his pulse. Eric secured the boat against the same rock shelf as before, and pulled a waterproof lamp from his satchel. The beam cut into the darkness below, catching flecks of movement that darted away into deeper shadow. His heart thudded in time with the faint drumbeat still echoing in his head, though no sound reached his ears now. He took out a collapsible pole marked with depth measurements and slowly lowered it into the water. The line dropped farther than expected, vanishing into pitch blackness. When he pulled it back, the end was wet with a faint oily sheen. "Not natural," he whispered. The air seemed thicker, the mist heavier, pressing down on his shoulders. Something about this place felt less like discovery and more like trespass. The tide began to rise, its current tugging gently at the boat. Eric stowed the pole and adjusted the lamp's angle, aiming deeper into the overhang's shadow. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw movement, a pale shimmer, almost like fabric, twisting in the water. He blinked, but it was gone. His mind replayed the old fisherman's words about the Fjords keepers. He tightened his grip on the lamp. "If you're watching," he murmured, "I'm not here to steal, only to see." The light caught on something just beneath the rock shelf, a gap in the stone, narrow but deep, its entrance shrouded in tangled kelp. The pulse in his temples quickened. This was it. The way forward lay below the surface. Eric dropped anchor in the shallowest spot he could find, careful not to let the hull scrape the rock. The water here smelled different, briny, yes, but with an undercurrent of something metallic. He secured the lamp to his belt and strapped a small oxygen tank over his shoulder. The fjord's cold bit at his skin the moment he leaned over, peering at the black opening below. His breath was shallow, controlled. He thought of the arrow rune, and the stories of hidden chambers where kings were laid to rest with their gold. But this wasn't just about gold. Not anymore. The pull he felt now was heavier, older, as though the fjord itself wanted him to enter. Without another thought, he slid into the water. The shock of the cold water was immediate, searing through Eric's suit as he descended. His lamp's beam cut a narrow path through the gloom, revealing darting fish and curtains of kelp swaying like green-black banners. He kicked downward, each stroke drawing him closer to the fissure in the rock. The entrance loomed larger now, its jagged edges worn smooth by centuries of tide. He reached out, running a gloved hand over the stone. It was unnaturally warm. A deep vibration hummed through it, faint but steady, like the echo of a long-forgotten heartbeat. The water seemed to pulse in time with it. Eric glanced once at the silver light of the surface above, then turned and slipped into the darkness of the cave. The fissure narrowed to a corridor of stone, its walls pressing close enough for Eric's shoulders to brush both sides. His lamp beam revealed silt drifting like smoke in the water, stirred by his movements. The hum he had felt outside grew stronger here, resonating through his bones. He kicked gently, careful not to disturb the water too much, and his hand found markings etched into the stone. Runic shapes, faint yet unmistakable, their grooves preserved in the mineral crust. Air bubbles slipped from his mask, climbing toward a ceiling he could not see. The cave twisted, and with each turn, the light from the entrance dimmed until there was nothing but the cold blue glow of his lamp. Ahead, the passage widened into a chamber, its floor hidden beneath a blanket of silt and broken timber. Eric drifted into the chamber, his movement slow and deliberate. The space was larger than he expected, the ceiling lost in darkness above. Along the edges, half buried in silt, lay the remains of what might have been longboats, splintered ribs of wood jutting at odd angles, draped in algae. As his light swept across the floor, it caught on something glinting beneath the muck. He knelt, brushing away the silt, and uncovered a rusted helm, its shape distinctly Viking. A thrill ran through him, proof that the stories were more than myth. He secured the helm to his belt and turned to explore further, unaware of the faint ripple passing just beyond the reach of his light. The ripple returned, stronger this time, brushing the water around him. Eric froze, his lamp swinging slowly toward the disturbance. Shadows shifted near the chamber's edge, but nothing solid appeared. He reminded himself that currents could play tricks in confined spaces. Still, he adjusted his grip on the lamp and swam toward a low arch at the far side of the cavern. The arch was framed with more runes, these carved deeper and sharper, as though meant to last forever. He traced a gloved finger along them, feeling the grooves vibrate faintly under his touch. The water here was warmer, unnervingly so, and carried a metallic tang. He hesitated, then pushed through the arch. Beyond the arch, the space narrowed again, but this time the walls shimmered faintly, as if flecked with gold dust. Eric's lamp revealed veins of mineral running through the rock, catching the light in muted sparkles. He followed the passage downward, feeling the pressure mount in his ears. The hum was louder now, a low vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. His heart pounded in rhythm with it. Then just ahead, the tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller, round, and in its center stood something impossible. A stone plinth, untouched by silt, with an object resting atop it. Eric approached the plinth, his movements slowed by both awe and caution. Resting on the stone was a small chest, bound in corroded iron bands but still intact. He reached out, brushing away a layer of fine sediment, revealing carved patterns along the lid, spirals and knotwork unlike any he had seen. As his fingers traced the design, the hum in the chamber deepened, becoming almost a voice, a low chant in a language he didn't understand. The water trembled faintly. He hesitated, breath quickening, and for the first time since entering the cave, he felt certain he was not alone. From the darkness beyond the plinth, something moved. The movement came again, swift, deliberate, skirting the edge of Eric's vision. He turned sharply, lamp beams slicing through the murk, but it caught only drifting silt. The hum inside the chamber swelled, vibrating through his chest like the slow beat of an enormous drum. He backed toward the plinth, unwilling to turn his back on the shadows. Then, from the far side, 2 points of faint light appeared, hovering in the dark like the reflection of his lamp, except they moved against the current. They blinked once, and he realized they were eyes. Large, unblinking, watching him. The water felt suddenly heavier, pressing in from all sides. Eric's hand hovered over the chest, torn between leaving it untouched or claiming it now. The eyes shifted closer, their glow brightening as a massive shape began to emerge. The form was humanoid in outline, but draped in strands of kelp and silt, its skin pale and rough like weathered stone. It moved with unnerving slowness, as though the water itself yielded to its presence. Eric's instincts screamed at him to flee, but the chest seemed to anchor his will. "Who are you?" he whispered, though the words were swallowed instantly by the water. The figure halted a few meters away, head tilting slightly as if in recognition or judgment. Then, the hum deepened again, and the water between them shimmered with faint golden light. Eric's lamp beam trembled slightly in his grip as the figure extended one hand, long and skeletal, toward the chest. It didn't touch, only hovered above it, as if to say the object was not his to take. Then it turned its hand toward him, palm outward, a warning. The message was clear enough. Eric nodded slowly, though he doubted the gesture mattered here. The guardian tilted its head once more before drifting backward into the shadows. The golden shimmer faded, leaving only the hum and the oppressive cold. Eric's breath rasped in his mask. He didn't know whether he had been spared or dismissed, but he knew one thing. The chest was bound to the guardian's will. The guardian's presence lingered even after it vanished, like a shadow pressed into the mind. Eric floated before the plinth, torn between retreat and defiance. He thought of the arrow rune, of the legends of a king's resting place, guarded for eternity. This was no simple burial. It was a pact, sealed in water and stone. Carefully, he reached for the chest again, fingertips grazing its cold, rough surface. The hum surged sharply, the water trembling so violently that silt billowed upward in choking clouds. Somewhere in that chaos, the faint outline of the guardian reappeared, moving faster now. Eric yanked his hand back from the chest, kicking upward toward the arch. The hum became a roar inside his skull, almost deafening. Behind him, the Guardian surged forward, its movements no longer slow and ceremonial, but swift, predatory. He swam hard, lamp beam swinging wildly, catching glimpses of runes flashing past. The golden shimmer followed, chasing him through the narrow corridor. His lungs burned, the surface still too far away. The thought struck him like ice: if he made it out, the chest, and whatever power it held, would still be waiting. But first he had to survive the next 30 seconds. Eric burst from the cave mouth in a flurry of bubbles, his chest aching as he fought the urge to inhale too soon. The cold fjord water pressed in on him, but the shimmer still burned in his vision, chasing him through the dark. He kicked upward with all the strength left in his legs, lamp beam thrashing against the black. For a moment he thought the Guardian's pale shape was beside him, gliding effortlessly, but it was gone when he looked again. The surface light grew closer, fractured and silver, until he broke through with a gasp that tore at his throat. He ripped the mask from his face, sucking in air, the roar in his ears fading to the whisper of wind over water. He pulled himself into the boat, muscles shaking from exhaustion. The fjord looked deceptively calm now, its cliffs silent and still, as though nothing had stirred beneath. Eric's breaths came ragged, his mind replaying the Guardian's warning. He looked down at his belt. He hadn't taken the chest. But clinging to his glove was something else, a scrap of woven material, waterlogged yet intact, its pattern a spiral knot identical to those on the chest. He stared at it, heart thudding. The Guardian had been closer than he thought, close enough to touch him. The thought made the cold seep deeper into his bones. The trip back to the harbor felt longer than it should have. Eric kept glancing at the water's surface, half expecting to see a pale shape just beneath, tracking him. But the fjord remained still, the only motion the slow ripples trailing his boat. The sound of the harbor bells reached him faintly through the mist. He pulled alongside the dock, tying off with practiced hands, but his eyes never left the water. The Guardian hadn't followed, he told himself. Still, the knotwork scrap in his pocket felt like an anchor, heavy with meaning he didn't yet understand. Inside the harbor's lone tavern, Eric sat at a corner table, his damp jacket steaming faintly in the warmth. The old fisherman who had sold him the boat shuffled over, eyes narrowing when Eric placed the fabric scrap on the table. "Where did you find this?" the man asked, voice tight. Eric hesitated. "In the fjord." The fisherman's gaze sharpened. "Then you've seen it, the one who waits. That cloth is from the king's own shroud. You weren't meant to touch it." Eric's mouth went dry. The hum he had heard in the cave seemed to echo faintly in his ears again, as if the fjord had followed him inside. The fisherman leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The Guardian doesn't leave the king's side. If you've come back breathing, it's because you didn't take what's his. But now it knows you." Eric's grip tightened around his mug. The tavern's warmth suddenly felt suffocating, his mind still trapped in the dark water. He thought of the chest, untouched but waiting, and of the Guardian's hand raised in warning. Somewhere out there beneath the black depths of the fjord, the last Viking king still rested. And Eric knew he would return. Not for gold, but for answers. And maybe, when the time was right, to finish what he had started. Back in his small rented room above the harbor, Eric spread books, maps, and copied runic translations across the desk. Candlelight flickered over old parchment, casting long shadows on the walls. Every account of King Harold, the last, mentioned his burial at sea, but none described the location, only veiled references to the king beneath the stone tides. More telling were the sagas that spoke of a Vector, a bound spirit set to guard a chieftain in death. The descriptions matched the pale figure he had seen, kelp-shrouded, unblinking, moving with the current's will. Eric's fingers traced the spiral knotwork on the scrap of fabric. The deeper he studied, the more certain he became that the fjord's guardian was no legend. It was a sworn sentinel, bound to the king for eternity. He turned a page in one crumbling manuscript, and found a fragment that chilled him, a warning carved into stone centuries ago. "The king sleeps where the gold breathes and the Vector wakes, None may take without offering, lest the tide claim them. The phrase, gold breathes, lodged in his mind. Could it refer to the golden shimmer in the water? If so, it wasn't mere reflection. He remembered the hum in his bones, the way the water seemed to pulse. Perhaps the treasure itself was alive, in some way. Outside, the wind shifted, and the tavern sign below creaked. In the quiet between creaks, Eric thought he heard it again, the faint beat of a drum, growing clearer. Eric stepped to the window, peering out toward the fjord. The mist was heavier tonight, swallowing the harbor lights until only faint halos remained. The water's surface was unnaturally still, reflecting the pale moon in a perfect circle. Then, just for a heartbeat, the reflection rippled, not from wind, but from something moving beneath. His breath caught. The drumbeat in his head quickened, matching the thud of his heart. He couldn't see the guardian, but he knew it was out there, watching, waiting. The knotwork scrap on his desk fluttered as though stirred by an invisible current. Sleep was impossible. Eric returned to the desk, sketching the cave system from memory, marking the arch, the runes, and the plinth. He drew the guardian's shape last, hands trembling slightly as he tried to capture its inhuman stillness. The act felt almost like an invocation. When the sketch was done, he stared at it for a long time. Every instinct told him that the guardian had allowed him to leave. That implied choice, and choices could be reversed. He closed the notebook, deciding that the only way to understand was to go back. But this time, he would not go alone. At dawn, Eric walked to the harbor's edge, the knotwork scrap tucked safely into his jacket. The mist was lighter now, but the fjord still felt watchful. He found the fisherman mending nets by the pier. "I need your help," Eric said. The man didn't look up. "I told you, leave it be." Eric leaned closer. "It's not just treasure down there. It's a story older than the king himself. I have to see it through." The fisherman's weathered hands stilled, his eyes narrowing. After a long pause, he said, "Then you'd better be ready to pay the tide's price." The boat cut through the morning mist in silence, the only sound the rhythmic creak of the oars. Eric sat opposite the old fisherman, the knotwork scrap wrapped carefully in oilcloth. The cliffs loomed ahead, their sheer faces glowing faintly in the pale dawn light. Neither man spoke. Words felt too small for what waited below. When they reached the rock shelf, the fisherman dropped anchor without ceremony. "We go down, we follow the current. No fighting it," he said. Eric nodded, securing his oxygen tank. The fjord's stillness was absolute, as if it were holding its breath for their descent. Without another word, they slipped into the black water together. The descent was slower this time, the fisherman leading with a steady, practiced pace. Eric followed the glow of his companion's lamp, the blackness pressing in on all sides. As they approached the fissure, the hum began again, low and resonant, vibrating through their bones. Passing under the arch, they entered the chamber with the plinth. The chest remained untouched, its knotwork glimmering faintly in the light. Then the water shifted, and from the far edge, the guardian emerged, larger now, its pale form more defined, its eyes fixed on them. The fisherman raised a hand in a gesture Eric didn't recognize, palm open toward the figure. The guardian stopped a few meters from the plinth. The fisherman reached into his satchel and withdrew a small carved figure of a longboat, its wood dark with age. He placed it gently on the stone beside the chest. The hum changed, becoming softer, almost melodic. The guardian tilted its head, then drifted forward, passing between them without aggression. It placed one skeletal hand on the chest and pushed it toward Eric. The message was unmistakable. He was being allowed to take it, but at a cost. The fisherman's eyes met his, grim but resolute. Eric nodded, his fingers closing around the iron-bound treasure. The moment Eric lifted the chest, the water around them shifted violently. The golden shimmer erupted, spiraling upward like molten light. The guardian's gaze locked on him one final time, and then it melted back into the shadows, vanishing completely. The hum faded, replaced by the rush of the current pulling them toward the exit. Eric and the fisherman swam hard, fighting the tide's grip until the pale silver of the surface came into view. Bursting into the air, they gasped in unison, the fjord's stillness returning as suddenly as it had been broken. Back in the boat, Eric set the chest between them. The fisherman didn't touch it, only watched as Eric unlatched the corroded iron bands. Inside was no gold, only a burial shroud, perfectly preserved, its spiral knotwork shining as if newly woven. Wrapped within lay a sword, its blade blackened with age, but humming faintly, the same deep resonance Eric had felt in the cave. "The king's oath," the fisherman said quietly. "It binds whoever carries it." Eric stared at the sword, the weight of its promise settling over him. The fjord's mist closed in once more, and he understood. The treasure was not meant to be kept. It was meant to be carried forward,